Queensland, 1857, 87 years since Captain James Cook first landed in Australia. On the east coast of what the British will call Queensland, a tribe of Aboriginals, the original inhabitants of the continent, gathered by the fires of their village, an uncertain future hanging over every man, woman and child. For tens of thousands of years, their ancestors had inhabited this land. Carefully cultivating the country of fire, they had made the land bountiful, with kangaroos, emus, and countless other species. However, in recent years, strange outsiders have recently arrived on their land from the sea, and they have brought with them strange animals. The tribe initially welcomed these outsiders, and in exchange for helping tend to the flocks of sheep and cattle, they would be given food and clothing. Peace was not to last. An Aboriginal man had a gun pointed at him by a British settler, supposedly for not leaving the sheep station when work was done for the day, and when a group of tribespeople returned to the sheep station, they were shot at by the ranchers, with one being wounded. Outraged, the warriors of the tribe attack a group of British farms, with 5 station hands losing their lives, including 3 men, 1 woman, and an Aboriginal servant, all before the tribe retreated. The tribe waits by their fires, debating their next move as they feast on stolen sheep, but they have no idea about the consequences of their actions and the excuse they have given their enemies. The British Empire's enforcers on the frontier had come to retaliate, and they had no mercy or restraint to give. As the tribe slept by a creek, 20 or so men in blue uniforms surrounded the camp in complete silence, as they positioned their double-barreled carbines in the high ground, observing the tribe's camp. And when one of the tribesmen awoke to stretch himself, a trigger was pulled. A chorus of gunfire then echoed out. Smoke filled the air, and a sound like thunder awoke the sleeping camp. The camp of nearly 100 men, women and children were torn apart by the initial volley of carbine fire, and the smell of blood and gun smoke hit the air as the trees surrounding the camp splintered from the torrent of fire. Tribe's warriors charged through the mass of wounded women and children and hurled their spears and boomerangs at the men in blue, firing at them, taking advantage of the slow reload time of their enemy, but they succeeded in only lightly wounding a few attackers. Soon the men in blue had reloaded, and what seemed like 24 paths of steel hornets carved through the tribespeople as they now turned and fled into the creek's water, many having dropped to the ground lifeless, or clutching a bloodied limb, a punctured neck, or a child. The men in blue then targeted the bobbing heads of the tribespeople until they ran out of ammunition, and mounting their horses, they used their carbines as clubs as they charged down the survivors. Those who survived fled east, but they did not get far. Pursued on horseback all the way to the coast, their blood soon covered the sandy white beaches of Australia's coast when the men in blue caught up to them. And these assaults would continue for weeks until heavy rains prevented further tracking of the tribe's survivors. The site of the initial crime would be named Hurricane's Creek due to the name of the first man in blue who shot her. With the sun-bleached skulls of those men, women and children who fell used to decorate the gardens of the local sheep station for decades after. British settlers arriving in the area for decades after would make a note of the numerous clusters of bleached bones strewn here and there, fully ribbed skeletons, fleshless arms, ghastly grinning skulls peeking out of the grass, the litter of the Empire's conquest. The leader of this crime would later state in his diary, "We cannot say where any of the murderers are amongst the mob, but they all must suffer, for the innocent must be held responsible for the guilt of others. Going to Gladstone tomorrow, but I do not suppose to be able to shoot any." 2nd Lieutenant Frederick Wheeler, 1859. But who were these men in blue, and what was their goal? This crime was the act of the Native Mounted Police, a brutal paramilitary force set up to protect the many sheep and cattle stations on the Australian frontier that were crucial to the economy of the young colony. They were used by all states of colonial Australia, with most of the force composing of native black troopers that were led by white officers and white NCOs. They were recruited from the numerous Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups that had already been colonised. It was made sure that these black troopers would be recruited from regions far away from the areas they would eventually patrol. This was done to ensure they had no common language, culture or identity with the tribes in their area of operation. They would see their Aboriginal enemies as foreigners or traditional enemies to be warred upon. The troopers would be trained in horsemanship, the use of various carbines, shotguns, pistols and rifles. When combined with their knowledge of tracking and how to find the Aboriginal tribes in the vast wilderness, this proved a potent mix. The official role of the NMP was to suppress native resistance to British encroachment, with massacres often being euphemistically referred to as dispersals in official orders given by Queensland's various police commissioners. The punitive expeditions of the NMP were almost always a response to native violence against encroaching settlers or livestock. However, the violence was often indiscriminate, with any native man, woman or child in the area being seen as fair game to the NMP, regardless if they resisted or not. Often with the assistance of local settler militias, not even natives working on the local pastoral stations were safe from roaming death squads. For 67 years, thousands of Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders were recruited into the NMP in Queensland. With their communities devastated by European disease and desperate to survive, many joined the ranks of the NMP. Aside from the low pay compared to their British superiors, they would be paid in rations, alcohol, access to hunting grounds, and given the prestige of a uniform, a gun and a horse. However, desertion, alcoholism and mental illness was common in their ranks, with much of the NMP's time spent tracking down deserters rather than fighting natives. The NMP was also used to track escaped convicts or criminals, or to protect land surveyors from the natives and patrolling the lawless goldfields. One dark incentive for the NMP troopers would be the ability to kidnap a wife. These women, often the survivors, would be forced to live with the troopers in their camps and bear them children that would often accompany the men on patrol. In the end, the NMP were crucial for the colonisation of the Australian continent. They protected the lives and profits of the sheep farmers and cattle stations, which would soon lead to Australia's vast grasslands, producing tens of millions of pounds of wool. This would create vast wealth and would be the justification for violence, with the idea the Australian continent was empty, with the land not being used by the natives, and therefore it could be taken from them with violence. With the useless, uncivilized natives fit only to fade away by whatever means needed to protect their livestock empires. The Aboriginals seen as little more than a pest and a species of the native fauna. The scale of the suffering inflicted by NMP was immense, with estimates of nearly 24,000 men, women and children dying at their hands from 1857 to 1897. This was due to Queensland's particularly large pre-contact population that made the fighting particularly bloody and bitter, and as large-scale transportation of convicts to Australia ceased in 1860, a huge influx of British settlers arrived on the land to make what we now know as modern Australian society. Many Aboriginal peoples therefore faced few choices other than survive by any means, like the NMP who destroyed them did. This involved them often living at the fringes of Australian society, with not just the trauma of the NMP, but the effects of generational poverty, stolen wages, state child removal, substance abuse, and broken families. Hello guys, that was a bit intense, wasn't it? I hope this AI logo I'm using at the minute isn't too insensitive. It's a bit of a change of tone. Well, anyway, if you're new here, I welcome you. And I'm planning on making a series of these videos on Australia's history and run up to the referendum. So if that's something that interests you, please like and subscribe, and hopefully you'll hear back from me soon. Take care. And apologies for the cold.